Welcome to Through the Lens, stories, life lessons, and musings with Amanda LaChapelle and guests. This is a podcast for taking a moment to dive into the most random stories and topics about life, art, and the world we live in. I've got Korie here from Storied by Korie, and when I thought about what I wanted to do with this podcast, I thought about, just having these genuine conversations with people where we could, talk about their profession, or we could talk about something about what they do that I find interesting, and I hope that the listeners find it interesting. And I wanted to interview Korie specifically because being a former photographer, it's kind of nerve-wracking to choose a photographer. It's kind of, a big ask to think about, who you trust that image and when you care so much about the medium. And I had followed her work on Facebook. I don't even remember if it was Rakita that was the person who I found you through or whatever it was, but I saw a lot of how I shoot or how I shot when I was a professional photographer in the way that Korie shot. And to me, that was important because, I wanted someone to represent me in the style that I would like, and I can't clone myself. So I'm so glad that Korie agreed when I sent her a random Facebook message. Thank you so much for being here, Korie.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So Korie, I'm probably going to share a little bit about my story after, but I'd love to hear a little bit about how you came to photography.
So I like to tell people that this started with a turquoise gift basket and a disposable camera, like when I was around 8 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my mom for Christmas, used to, I don't know if they still do it, but used to, in Walmart, they used to have these really cheesy gift baskets during the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And she found one and she got one for each, me, my brother, my sister. And mine was turquoise and it had a turquoise disposable camera in it that you could send off and get the pictures done. And I thought to myself, I was like, man, this is really cool. I've never gotten to, take pictures with the disposable before because that was always reserved for adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember taking pictures of my brother riding his bike that he got for Christmas. And my mom going and getting those developed. And I was like, I took those. That was me. I took those.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I was like, I totally can do this for the rest of my life. I'm totally going to be a National Geographic photographer. And that's what's going to happen. So that I would like to say that's physically how it started. But I have always been super, super intrigued by the photos that I had growing up. I got to see family members and people that I had never met before that I was unable to meet because they passed away before I was born. I got to meet them through photographs. I got to see my, grandmother, she's still alive, but I got to see her as a little kid in photographs. And I always thought that was really, really interesting. And I was like, I want to do that for people. I want to give them something that they can show their kids one day. And so obviously back then it was just a very rudimentary thought. And obviously it's evolved since then. But that's kind of how I got my start, was through old photo albums and that turquoise disposable camera.
So mine was not turquoise. It was a Walmart special, but I also had a penchant for disposable cameras, which should not be a surprise. But my mom used to get so mad because they were expensive, but I also would shoot people shoot with digital photography. I would take the same pictures of everybody in the schoolyard, and she's like, this is the same photo. Why did you take more than one? There's only 23 pictures you can put on here. But I remember, thinking back to that time, and going, oh, this is fun. Something's happening. I want to remember this, right?
Uh-huh.
And what I didn't realize was those disposable pictures, and there's mostly in grade 7 and 8 when I started doing that. I moved away. I didn't know I was going to move away, but I moved away from the place that I had grown up my whole life. And those photos were these talismans that I got to keep later. The really crazy thing though was at the time I never envisioned photography as a career for me, because most of the people who were photographers that were full time at that time, they were men, and it wasn't something that women would pursue.
Absolutely.
So it was kind of it was a hobby, but nothing I really envisioned myself doing as a career. And what changed it for me was digital photography. My then boyfriend bought me my first digital camera, and I was like, well, I can take as many as I want, or at least as many as the memory card would hold back then.
That was me. That was me. The digital world changed everything.
I know. And it also was like, I can look back now and I can think there was like an insecurity piece with film, right? Like you had to shoot hoping that it would turn out. And, I am a person who I can admit that I fall prey to my own fears sometimes where, that would have felt like not at all possible. Whereas with digital, you had the validation right then and there of what you captured. And you could manipulate it later, but you knew you at least had something workable, right? So it was kind of like this barrier came down.
Absolutely. I agree with that, because obviously, like, once my mom saw that, like, oh, she likes this, like, maybe we need to move to something a little more economical, right? I got that first little digital camera when I was about 14 or 15. Because that was when the point and shoots were getting like really popular, right? And I just remember saying to myself, and like I'm pretty sure that was the only thing on my Christmas list that year. Like I just gave my mom different cutouts of digital cameras. I'm like, this is all I want. This is all I want
for birthday and for Christmas. Like
that's it. That's all I want. So I remember that, and the first big trip I got to take it on. And I felt so cool. It was my first ever trip out of the state, actually. Well, out of the state by myself. I went to Washington, D.C. to a conference for other, teenage kids. And I remember taking my digital camera, and I still have those photos. I made a whole photo album when I got back. And I have those pictures of my friends that I made in DC. And I still like keep in touch with a lot of them, and we share those photos back and forth, And it was so cool to me, because that was the first time I felt like I had like immortalized a part of my life. Like how you said, like with the film camera with your friends and you not knowing you were going to move, right? Like it felt for the first time I had like immortalized something that I wouldn't be able to experience again. It wasn't the same feeling as the friends I saw every day, right? These were people that lived all over the country, and I was never going to see them again for the most part. I was 15. And so it was really cool. It like the digital age also changed the game for me too. Cause I was like, I can take as many pictures as I want. And I did. We printed out hundreds of photos when I got back. It was horrible. But my mom did it. Shout out to her. She's always been a supporter of the dream.
That's awesome. So, you're touching on something that kind of leads me to the next question that I had. So for me, when I would shoot predominantly weddings, and I would always be thinking of like, what is somebody going to want to keep? What is the thing that if they were to look at anything later and they were to think of their wedding day and they could hold a piece of their wedding day in their hands, or even in the case of portraits, what do they want to keep? What's the essence of what they want to keep? Now, I've experienced, your photographic skill, I mean, I have very clear memories that I don't know if we want to talk about on the podcast. But like, if you think about your process, like what would you say your process is? Like, how are you analyzing that for yourself?
I guess when I am going through photo session with a family, because that's mainly what I photograph. I mean, I photograph a few weddings too, but it's mainly families. I want families to remember and to have a sense of who they were at that very moment. Like, I don't want them to have any sort of like expectation or preconceived notion of who they should be, who their kids should be, who like parents, who they should be, right? Like, I want them to remember everything exactly as it was, because time moves so fast. And the people I hear that from the most are parents. That parents talk about how time just goes so fast, how they don't know how their 3-year-old became 18, right? And now they're graduating high school. And some of these families I've been with for that long. And, I just recently photographed a family where I was there when they when they announced they were pregnant with their daughter. And I was there when they brought her home from the hospital, and now she's going on like 5. And the family's like, we don't know where the time went, but we're so happy that you were there for all of it. Like, they have pictures from each moment of her life that, they won't see again, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what I want people to remember, exactly how they were at that moment. I don't care if your kid was crying. I don't care if they had an attitude. Like, I want you to remember that, because
Yeah.
that's who you loved and that's who they were at that time. So
And you're going to miss those times, even though you don't think about it. Like, you think, oh man, would they just be quiet or would they just sit still? But the reality is one day they're not going to be wanting to sit with you anymore. They're going to be, off doing their own thing, and you're going to wish for those days back. I know it doesn't seem like it in the moment.
yeah.
But I can say that. I mean, it's been a few years since you took our photos, but Nate's 14, almost 15, and Aiden's 11, almost 12. And I mean, they were a little, disturbers the day of the session, but I think they would be much better behaved now, but I don't know if I would want that. I kind of loved the swearing and all the things that they did.
Exactly.
It was an interesting memory that we made in a weird national park in Florida.
There you go.
But those pictures are on my wall. Like they're nice and big because they represent my family. They represent the silliness of my boys. And you managed to get a photo that even I had struggles getting, which is the two of them side by side, their arms around each other, laughing. Usually they just want to fight.
Yeah.
Which you got those photos too.
Exactly. Because that's who they are, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a representation. One day when they get married, we could put it up on screen and say that's what they look like.
Exactly.
But like that whole concept of having families throughout the years. I mean, I was a photographer for over 15 years, and there are people that were there at the beginning of my career, that were there at the end, that I might, and I shouldn't probably admit this publicly, still take photos for, and because not everybody can have that. Where like I literally photographed their newborns, within 10 days of being born, and now they're 14, like, and I know that their weddings are going to happen, in the next 10 years, or possibly, who knows with nowadays, but it's kind of wild to see that journey. One of them in specific, one family in specific, they actually hired me when their first daughter was born for 5 times in the same year. They had hired me for, a maternity session, a newborn session, 6 months, a year, and then the baptism. I think I did the math right there. And I've photographed them like once a year up until I retired. And unfortunately, last year, the first person that I photographed, the matriarch of the family, their mother passed away. And I took the last photos that they had together as a family before she passed. And I think it was last year. Yeah. I'm just trying to make sure that timeline's right. And I remember, knowing that she was in her last days, and I offered to go out and take photos again, and they weren't in a position to do it. But, the sentiment at the time was, if they would have trusted anybody with it, it would have been me. And I know that the last photos that I took, something really beautiful happened that I'm going to try and retell without crying. And I'm going to hope that you don't cry too, because it was kind of really moving. But we went out, we did this session. She was really having difficulty with her mobility at that point. And she, did all the family photos. We had a golf cart so she can get around. And then we get towards the end of the session, and she asked for a photo with each one of her daughters on their own. And she was sitting on this bench, and she was holding their hands, and she said, I want you to look at me, and I'm going to talk to you. And there's going to be a photo of me talking to you. And at every point after I'm gone, and you need to talk to me, I want you to look at this photo, and I want you to remember this moment, and I'm there with you. And I was like,
oh my God,
I'm done.
Oh my gosh.
They call me their memory keeper, but like I actually said to her before she passed, I said, you've given me so many beautiful moments and so many great examples of what a wonderful family looks like. Thank you for that. But there are, people out there that, really value and understand what those photos mean. And I mean, I loved photographing those people. I'm sure you would say the
Oh
same
my
thing.
gosh. See, now you're going to make me cry. Like, I can't. Like, that is beautiful. Oh my gosh. Ooh,
I can only
clouds
say
with
it now
rain.
with sincerity, because, and I'd still have tears in my eyes, but, those people stay with you. You have those people that mean something to you like that, and it's really crazy too, because I'm sure you've heard it a billion times, and I'm sure I've even said it to you. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't like my photo taken, and they don't want their photo taken, and they dread it. And it's because there's this camera, like, focus on everything, and the only thing that they see is like the, the things that they're insecure about. Like, I used to focus so much of my career on how to find what was beautiful about someone. And I know, after having been photographed by you, that you're very similar. Like, how do you look at someone? And I know it's an abstract question, but like, how do you look at someone and see, what's beautiful about them, and kind of enhance and bring that out in the session?
This is also a part of my process. I like talking to people, right? Mm-hmm. So my sessions are very, I won't say they're not conventional. I feel like a lot of photographers do this, but I like to say that it's unique to my process, right? Is that like, I talk to people like during the session. I talk to them. I talk to them during the session, before the session. And usually in those moments where they're talking, I see the thing that makes them light up, right? Mm-hmm. And so then once I see that spark, like, I'm like, that's it. That's what I need to focus on. That's the thing that makes them beautiful, or makes their essence beautiful, or whatever, right? Like, usually for a lot of parents, for a lot of moms, it's seeing their kids look so cute, like on photo day, right? Like, they weren't expecting the cute thing to happen, and then the cute thing happened, and they're like, oh my God, I just love them so much. And it's like they see their newborns all over again, right? And I'm like, that's it. I need to pull that out of her, right? Mm-hmm. And then, especially when it comes to like the parents, like if I have parents who are still together, right? Getting them by themselves and really pulling out that like young couple pre-kids in them, right? Like that part of them that they haven't really seen a whole lot of in a few years, and really pulling out the beauty of that, the beauty of what they've built. I actually just sent off a canvas to a family, and it was of the couple. And I told them in the letter in the canvas, I said, I want you to hang this, and I want you, every time you look at it, and every time your kids ask you about this photo, like, I want you to remind them of the love that you guys had that built this, right? Mm-hmm. That built this family, and the beauty that surrounds that. So really, it comes from like talking with people, me seeing kind of that sparkle in their eye when something happens. I then push on that button a lot. I push it to watch them, kind of light up again. And I just love doing that, and I love seeing that, because obviously anyone can go sit in a makeup chair, and anyone can go get their hair done, and they can still feel completely awful about themselves and not want to be in front of a camera. It's not until they fully recognize how wonderful they are that they become really open and like gorgeous in front of a camera, right? So that's kind of what I do.
So I think for me, because I did portraits, and I would agree entirely with your process. I think for weddings, it was almost easier because it's this like incredibly moving day already. You know, the hardest part is getting that to that vulnerable place where someone's willing to show you, who they are, and let down their guard about whatever, highlight real, careful, crafted message that they're trying to put together from, the exact outfits that they got and the way things match, right? Yeah. and weddings, they naturally have these moments imbued in them, and people are already vulnerable, whether they want to be or not, right? It's just a big day. It's filled with a lot of emotions. But like, I would find, ways, I don't want to call it manufacture because that feels disingenuous, but to set the stage, as it were, set the ambiance for things to happen. Yeah. So like, if you think about, I'll give you one of my classics, one of my go-to moves, if you would. If the bride was close with her father, I would not allow the father in the prep room. He was not allowed to see his daughter until she was fully ready. And then we would stage a reveal, and we would be like, just the same respect as it would be for the groom. And you could do the father, you could do both parents, whatever the case would be. Mom usually helps get ready, but nonetheless. And I would always poke my head, around the door before we open the door, had somebody open the door, and I would say, are you ready to see your little girl? And the purpose behind that was to remind him of the photos that you take when they were little. And then when he's looking at her as an adult, he's mixing the two together. And, the moments that come from that are just, they're real, But I think a photographer's job is a little bit about, how do you access the vulnerability? How do you break down the walls? How do you get to parts of people, that maybe they're not necessarily as comfortable, showing, right? And so like when I think about that, I'm thinking about the portraits and the way that you shoot for that. How would you say that you find ways, other than maybe talking with them, to naturally enhance, their essence, to bring that out?
So very similar to you. So I kind of prompt them along. I kind of set the scene too and kind of get their mindset in a different place. So you talked about weddings, which like you said, it's very easy for weddings to get to that point because it's already high emotion anyways. So it has been very interesting and challenging in a good way to figure out how to do it with families. On scene when I only have like an hour and a half with them, right? So I'm having to create these really vulnerable moments in a very short period of time, right? And how I have figured out a way to do that is honestly in smaller like groupings, to be completely honest, and then bringing people back together. So the way I do that is I will always get mom with kids, and I always tell her that, hey, and it can be mom or dad because, there's various family types, mom, grandma, whoever.
Yeah.
I will always get them alone with the kids and I'll be like, I want you to relax and remember today that your kids are your kids. Like, there's no expectation for them today. I have zero expectations of them. I just want you to love on them. Just love on them, right? And usually that will elicit some sort of parental response. Like it will elicit this kind of like heart response that I don't think they were expecting because a lot of them come really frazzled, like, get in the car. Like, we gotta get there. And just breathe. Let your kids be kids. I want your kids to be kids and I want you to love on them. Love on them as if I wasn't here, right? Like, what is your bedtime routine? Love on them like that.
Yeah.
And so usually that's what ends up happening. And then I bring them all back together. And now it's kind of this really loose, really like, oh, okay, we care about each other, right? And so now it's a lot easier to elicit those like genuine smiles, those like really like free and like genuine emotions that they have with like other parents and like usually like dads. They'll come in and like I give them the freedom to like horse around with their kids that mom usually is like, don't do that, but I give them full freedom, right? And that usually loosens up like the dads in the photos too. So it makes it to where like now everyone is in a more comfortable space. One, they now are okay with each other if they were upset in the car, right? Two, and now they trust me. So now I've created this space where like now you can be exactly who you need to be and pretend I'm not even here, right? So that's kind of how I work that process a little bit.
And what's crazy is you're doing all that at the same time as you're evaluating what your camera settings are and what the lighting is. And it's kind of this wild part of photography that I think maybe sometimes people get lost. And one of the reasons why I wanted to tell the story was that done well, it's an art form because it isn't just the medium of, film or the end result of the photo. It's the moment that you create. It's the way that you manipulate the situation in order to get the end result that that's desired, at the same time as controlling the camera, as controlling the lighting. And there's all these little, minute evaluations that have to happen in a blink of an eye. And there's not a lot of room for error because, as we've said multiple times now, moments are fleeting. You do not get them back. You can't necessarily recreate that beauty that happened in that, split second. So you have to be ready, right? Yeah. So like, if I was to ask you, what is the one thing that you would wish that anybody who's listening to this, would know about what they should do or how they should mentally prepare themselves before they step in front of the camera, what advice would you give them?
Lose every expectation you thought that you had about being photographed. Unless you just absolutely know, right? And like photographers are real bad about this, photographers who get photographed, right? Because I am one of those. I'm a terrible, terrible client, right?
Me too.
I'm a horrible client. But for the most part, the average client, like they go into photography or photo sessions with this expectation of like what's supposed to happen and how they're supposed to look and oh my God, what do I do with my hands? Right. And if I could tell anyone listening to this, like lose all the expectations, have a free flowing conversation with your photographer. Just, how's the session gonna flow? And just go and be yourself. Like go and be your authentic self when you're out with your friends. Like, how do you do those pictures when you're out with your friends? Be that person, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to put on a facade, like when you get photographed, because the photos are going to pick up on that.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be your authentic self.
I think too, that conversation piece of what you're talking about, it kind of goes two ways in another way. There's something that I would do where I would ask people, before I photograph them, okay, especially if they had said, I don't photograph well, or I don't like myself in photographs, I'd always ask them, what don't you like?
Exactly.
And it wasn't because I agreed with them, but I knew that I was not going to be able to climb inside their mind after the fact. So before the fact, if I understood that, Jessica doesn't like her face this way, she prefers this side, then I'm armed with the information that I would not necessarily know because I don't see Jessica the way that she sees herself, right?
Exactly.
So like being open and honest with the photographer and having that conversation about where your insecurities lie, we have tools, we have the ability to be able to control that situation, but we can't read minds. We need to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a cheat for all of it.
And I guess I would throw that in as like as a second one too. Like your photographer is not a magician in any way, shape, form, or fashion, and we can't read minds, right?
No.
So having vulnerable conversations with your photographer, will help in the long run.
Yeah.
It'll make you more comfortable going forward. And it'll also help us make you more comfortable going forward, right?
Well, too, because I'm sure you've had it. Every photographer, there's a sentence that they hate, which is fix it in post.
Yes.
Damn it. If you just tell me what it is that you want to fix now, I can do it with lighting and I can do it with posing. It's way more complicated to do it. I'm on my little rant here, but it's way more complicated to do it in Photoshop. Do not fix it in post. Just tell me.
Exactly.
I think that one of the main things I also wanted to bring out was, we're just in this age where social media has us looking at perfection and glamorizing everything. And I really just want, to lose the trends, to lose the filters, and really get to a place where people start considering, what does my real life look like? Because I can't get this moment in time back, like you were saying, right? So, I just wanted to highlight that the people should come first, the essence of who they are versus, the glamour of whatever we can stage per se, right?
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. Like it has been in the last year or so, I've been getting a lot more inquiries of people who really do want kind of this like influencer-esque type photograph. And I have to tell people all the time, I'm like, hey, thank you so much, but this is not who I am. So I don't even feel comfortable offering you a service because I'm not going to give you that. What I can give you though is you. And I want you to see how amazing and beautiful you are. And obviously I'm so okay with them going to other people. And I recommend other photographers all the time who are in that vein. Right. But I'm not the photographer.
I wasn't like that either. I certainly had, clients that would go to the extra mile in what they were buying and the makeup or whatever. But in the essence of what they wanted in their photo, I would call myself a visual storyteller because I felt like that was really what people were buying. We were buying a capturing of their story, which is always funny to me because when I saw your company name, I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure she's for me. So there's a business lesson in this podcast too. Not every client is your client, and your messaging needs to be on point.
Exactly.
Oh, well, that's pretty much the amount of time that I wanted to chat with you today, just because I wanted to make sure to not take up too much of your time. And we covered pretty much what I wanted to do. And I thank you so much for your time, Korie. I hope anybody who's listening, kind of understands a little bit more about what it's like behind the veil of, being a photographer, and, what's important to be captured, and put your time and your money into the right things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I think this is so important. What you're talking about is so important, because we are the storytellers of our generation, right? Like, we are the
Yeah.
storytellers. We are the ones that, when all this stuff is gone, and we will become the analog, right, of the future, people are going to look back on this, and we're going to be the people who told the story. So
Oh, yeah.
I
Print your photos. Print your photos.
print them. Print them. I don't care if you go through Walgreens, and photographers
Yeah,
will kill me
don't
by
care.
saying that.
Yeah.
But go get them printed. I don't care, right? You
Yeah.
can print through your photographer. You can print through Walgreens. Get your photos printed. Your
Yeah.
kids need something in their hands. They can't hold a
Yes.
jump drive in their hand for show and
No.
tell.
And your
So
cell phone, if it dies and it gets tossed in a lake, you lost everything. So
everything.
yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, thank you so much, Korie.
you're so welcome.